Hey, what's going on, y'all? Welcome to the Endless TBR. My name is Christian, and this is my YouTube channel where I love to talk about books. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to click on this video, where I'm doing my recap and ranking of all the books that I read in March of 2026. It was a fabulous month for me. I had so much fun reading all the books that I read in March. There were so many great ones that are going to be all timers for me. Overall, I read 6 physical books, 1 book on my Kindle, and then 4 audiobooks I listened to. So something I'm going to do a little bit different for this video. I did it on my nostalgia ranking video a couple days ago, and it's going to be a little different from my other post-month ranking videos. But I decided that I'm going to show you guys all the books that I read first and then rank them. So that way you kind of have an idea for what books are coming up in the ranking. You can kind of see what we're working with for this list. So the books that I read, starting off with the physical books, I read Watchers by Dean Koontz. I read Midnight for Charlie Bone by Jenny Nemo as my nostalgia pick. I read The Night Walker by Sebastian Fitzek. We've got Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. And then I ended up reading 2 Stephen King novels, or 1 Stephen King novel and 1 novella, I should say. I read The Mist by Stephen King, which wasn't on my TBR, but I ended up picking it up at a bookstore and decided to read it since I was behind on my Stephen King readings. And then I also read Firestarter by Stephen King. So those are the 6 physical books I finished. The Kindle book that I read, I actually started in February as part of the class I'm taking for school. It is The Italian by Anne Radcliffe. I kind of started it in February. My essay for it got pushed back a while, so I kind of paused it for a bit and then went back in March and knocked that out. So it feels like I've been reading that one forever, but it's only been like a month or so. But that is The Italian. And then the 4 audiobooks I listened to in order of when I completed them. I started off with Heated Rivalry by Rachel Reed. That was my book club's pick of the month. And then I listened to When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. That was a great one. And then I listened to A Wrinkle in Time. And then finally, I just finished not too long ago Scar Tissue by Anthony Kiedis. That is the lead singer for the Red Hot Chili Peppers band, a band that I've been a fan of for a long time, and that is his autobiography. So those are the 4 books that I listened to, accumulating in 11 books total. So now I'm going to rank them for you in order from my least favorite to my favorite read. As always, I say that this ranking is strictly based off of my personal enjoyment of these books. So let's get into it. Coming in at number 11 in last place, and I should say I didn't hate this book by any means. I gave it a 3 out of 5. I thought it was just, kind of middle of the road, but it was my nostalgia pick for the month, Midnight for Charlie Bone by Jenny Nemo. I wasn't as captivated by this book as I was when I was a kid. I remember having such fond memories and then rereading it as an adult. Like, it was enjoyable, but I didn't love it or even really like it by any means, mostly because I just found it to be really bogged down by a lot of plot lines. I wish it had focused more on just Charlie Bone going to this academy with all these talented people and these endowed individuals who kind of have these cool superpowers. Like, that was the area that I was really focused in and looking forward to. But this book chose to kind of focus on this other side plot that became the main plot, and it just never really hooked me as much as I wanted it to. I am working on the second book right now, and I will say it is enjoyable. I'd say as of right now, I'm like halfway through it and I'm liking it a little bit more than Midnight for Charlie Bone, but this one is going to have to come in at last place for the month. Coming in at number 10 is going to be the ebook that I read, the one for school, The Italian by Anne Radcliffe. This is a classic novel. This is one of the first female Gothic novels. And as far as the history of literature goes, it is a very important book. I just put it down on the bottom of the list because it is a lot older than the other books. It was written in the mid to late 1700s, I believe. And so the way that it's written is, more old school. It's not as captivating and exciting as some of the more modern books are written. Like, I love and appreciate these older books, but sometimes the way they're written, like, can feel like they drag on a little bit. The Italian is definitely one of the better 1700 novels that I've read. I've read a couple like Gothic novels in this semester so far, and I'd say The Italian is probably my favorite. There are a lot of great themes throughout the book about love and betrayal and not being able to trust like big religious institutions like the Inquisition is a major factor and major enemy in this story. And it was overall an enjoyable time. If I had to, redo this list to put like which book I think is the most important novel I'm about to talk about in this video, this would definitely be at number one. But as far as overall enjoyment, it's going to be kind of towards the bottom. Again, I didn't dislike this book at all. I actually think I gave it like a 3.75, which for me is like almost at that point where it's like, this is a really good book. It's just coming in down closer to the bottom because I enjoyed reading a lot of these other books a little bit more. So that is Anne Radcliffe's The Italian. Coming in at number nine is the audiobook that I listened to as part of my book club that I'm part of, and that is Heated Rivalry by Rachel Reed. This is another book. I believe I gave it a 3.75 out of 5. And overall, I enjoyed it. I will say the reason it's a little lower is this is not really my cup of tea when it comes to like genre. I am not a big romance person, and this book is just a straight up romance novel. I'm also slowly getting used to, I'm getting better at it, but when it comes to like very visual and constant like sexually explicit scenes and chapters throughout books, it's just not something that I'm really used to. I kind of started reading ACOTAR a couple years ago, and so kind of got my first exposure to those kinds of like chapters and set pieces in that series. Heated Rivalry triples down on anything that I read in ACOTAR. There are so many like visual physical romance chapters throughout this book that were in many times like quite not off-putting but just shocking to me, where I was like, wow, I can't believe what I'm listening to. Like very like visually in depth as to what's going on in the scene. I will say though, what I did appreciate about this book a lot is at its core it is a very touching story about these two guys that have a strong connection. They love each other very much, but they can't go public with their love. They can't be seen together because they're both in the hockey profession and they aren't sure like how a gay romance is going to be perceived by the larger community. So it was a very touching story that I thought was very well done. And I would say the last 20% of the book really, really brought my rating up for me. Like when it really started to come out that they were in this relationship and it was kind of coming to a head where they needed to figure out what they were going to do next. Is it always going to be a secret, or are they going to actually, let people know? That portion of the book I thought was really, really solid. And ended up being a main reason why this book ended up a little closer to 4 stars than 3 stars. So overall, Heated Rivalry was a good time, just not really my genre. And if you're not a fan of like very like graphic sexual encounters, then it might not be the right book for you. But that is Heated Rivalry. Coming in at number eight was another audiobook I listened to. I actually have a physical copy of it here, though. It is A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline L'Engle, but I did listen to it in audiobook form, even though I have the physical copy of it. But this was a really, really fun story. I think it's one that's very widely known, but it is a children's story about this brother and sister and their classmate who are basically approached by these like interdimensional beings who say they know their father who has gone missing and that he's invented this like technology to be able to warp across space. And these three beings help these kids go out and find their father. And it was a very fun story. I don't really have any like negative things to say about it. The one thing I will mention is that there was a foreword in the audiobook where it talks about how a Wrinkle in Time has been criticized for being a children's novel, but being written in a way that could be a little more complicated towards children to understand. And I kind of see that a little bit, like as far as kids' books go, I'd say this one is a little more hard to grasp and follow what's going on. I did kind of rewind and re listen to some sections and chapters, but overall, it was a really good time. And it was just a nice, feel good adventure with a lot of whimsy and interesting characters. There's this one character named Aunt Beast that appears towards the end, who was one of the most delightful characters I read about this entire month. But yeah, overall, Wrinkle in Time was a great time. It's just, again, not necessarily the genre that I would normally read. And so it's ending up toward a little lower in this list, not because it's bad. I gave it a solid like 4 out of 5 stars, but just because there are a lot more books on this list that I enjoyed way more. So that is A Wrinkle in Time. All right, coming in at number seven is Firestarter by Stephen King. This one is a bit of a mixed bag for me. and I actually rated it a little lower than A Wrinkle in Time. I gave this one a 3.75, but I'm putting it higher on my list of enjoyment because I did enjoy reading this more than A Wrinkle in Time, but there is a mixed bag feature to it. So if you're not familiar what the story is about, it is this father and daughter duo, Andy and Charlie, and they're on the run from this like mysterious government organization because both of them possess special psychic powers. The father was part of a secret government experiment that granted him psychic powers, and then he had a baby with another girl that was in with a lady that was in that experiment, and they gave birth to Charlie, who has very strong. They call it pyrokinetic abilities. She can like start fires with her mind just by thinking about it. What I will say is the first half of this book I loved. I thought it was excellent. It really starts in media res with you have Charlie and Andy on the run from this shady organization. They're just trying to survive. They're trying to get away so they can live a normal life. And I thought that whole sequence, the first half of this book, was really great. Then something happens about halfway through the book, and I'm not going to go into detail about it because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But there's a big change in what is going on in the story. In the second half of the book, I was never as invested as I was in the first half of the book. The ending overall I thought was very solid and very emotional and touching, but that like halfway to like 50 pages before the end of the book, I was just never as invested in the story as I was during that first half. So Firestarter was a really solid book. As far as where it ends up on my overall Stephen King ranking of the books I've read by him so far, it is towards the lower end, but still a good story that I recommend to fans of Stephen King who are trying to read all of his books. All right, coming in at number 6 is Scar Tissue by Anthony Kiedis. This is an autobiography that I listened to in audiobook form about the lead singer of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. If you're unfamiliar, they are a band that plays like funk, alternative rock. They really became famous in like the 80s and 90s, but they've had a lot of hits since then, and they're still active today. And the reason that I read this book or listened to this book, it actually goes way back in my life to when I was a little kid. I am a bass player. I play the electric bass, and the biggest influence in my life, the person I looked up to most when it came to musicianship, was Flea, the bass player for the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And so, from like late elementary school all through high school and even today, I have loved the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They've always been one of my favorite bands. When I was in middle school, I got a hold of a copy of Scar Tissue, the book, and my mom was like, I'm gonna read it first to see if it's appropriate because she kind of knew that these guys led like crazy rock and roll lifestyles. She read it. She said, "You absolutely cannot read this book. There is way too much drug use and sex and all that stuff in here." And so I didn't get to read it when I was a kid. And I just kind of pushed it off, pushed it off, pushed it off. And then I remembered it and I was like, you know what? I'm going to download the audiobook on Libby and finally get around to listening to it. So, as far as autobiographies go, I thought it was a good time. It was a solid read. Anthony Kiedis um, goes a little bit too in depth. Like it's very repetitive when it comes to like the drug use and he hooks up with a lot of different women on tour and stuff like that. And those aspects I found to be a little bit repetitive. It was like, then I scored coke on this night, and then I did this drug on this night, and then I hooked up with this girl and this girl. Um, but the parts that I did find really interesting and very cool that kind of redeemed the book for me a little bit was when he really went in depth talking about like the experience working with the other members of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. There's been a lot of lineup changes. Some of them have passed away while they were in the band, and so him reflecting on those moments and when he talks about the experiences of recording certain albums, he goes in depth on I wrote this song about this thing that was happening in my life. And then he kind of like recites off some of the lyrics of the song, and you get a really good behind the scenes look of what that song actually means. It was really interesting. Like, there were songs that I had listened to for years and years and years, and now finally seeing the context of when and why they were written and what the lyrics really meant to him, I would go back and re listen to the song, and it was like hearing it for the first time all over again. That part was really magical. As a big Red Hot Chili Peppers fan, I loved those moments. And don't get me wrong, his life was crazy and entertaining as well. Some of the things that Anthony Kiedis went through, like it is a miracle that he is still alive to be able to like still perform and to have even written the book, which he wrote the book many decades ago. But the fact that he's alive is a miracle. It's just like I said, some of it at a certain point it got a little bit repetitive when it came to went to the drugs and women. But overall, I enjoyed it. I don't know how people who aren't fans of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, I don't know how they'll receive this book. It's definitely geared towards people that are fans of the band. But if you are a Red Hot Chili Peppers fan, I think there's a lot to enjoy in Scar Tissue. So that is coming in at number 6. Coming in at number 5 is this book, The Nightwalker by Sebastian Fitzek. So this is a really interesting book. I picked it up at my local Books a Million on sale. We didn't know anything about it. It was just kind of like a blind pickup. And it turns out this was translated from German. So Sebastian Fitzek is a German writer. This was the first book of his that was translated into English. And so some of the writing in it, you can tell it's like a translation. There were moments where I was like, that's worded a little differently, a little interestingly. And so I ended up looking up like what this book was about. And then when I found out it was a translation, it started to make sense. So some of the writing is a little bit bizarre and worded a little bit interestingly, but the overall plot of this story was great. So it's about this guy. His name is Leon Nader, and he has this past history of sleepwalking, and he has reasons to believe that in his youth when he was sleepwalking he would also commit violent crimes. He's been in like various like orphanages and stuff like that and has been kind of moved around because he's had a lot of issues as a kid. Fast forward to he is now an adult, and he wakes up one day after a long bout of no longer sleepwalking. He wakes up and he finds his fiance is beaten up and bloody and like running away from him. And he comes to consciousness and he's like, what's wrong, what's happening with you? And she's just trying to leave the apartment. She goes and she disappears. And so he is led to believe that he is entering another phase of his life where he is beginning to sleepwalk again, and he has reasons to believe that he was the person that abused his fiance and he is the reason why she ran away. I will not go into depth too much more about it, but it turns out there's a lot more going on than just his sleepwalking. There are a lot of twists and turns throughout this book, and I just found it to be wildly entertaining. It was such a I never knew what was going to happen next throughout the story, and by the end of it, when you kind of have the breakdown of what was actually going on throughout the story, it's one of those things where it's like I could have never guessed what was going on, and it was really exciting to go back and see the entirety of the story and how it played out and where the ending led to. This is one of those books where I would love to reread it again now knowing what the ending is. So I can kind of look for those hints and clues. But if you have never heard of this book or this author, I definitely recommend checking him out. I have not looked to see if any of his other German books have been translated into English, but if I find that they are, I would love to read another book by Fitzek. So that is The Nightwalker. Coming in at number 4 is The Mist by Stephen King. Again, another a book that was not on my TBR for March, but I ended up reading it anyway. I found it in a bookstore, and I have a goal this year to read a Stephen King book every month. I didn't do that for February, so I decided to double down in March because this is a really short one, like 150 pages. And I was very familiar with what The Mist was going to be about. I've seen both the movie and the TV show, so I was well aware of kind of what was going to happen going into this one. But if you're not familiar, it is the story of this father and son and a bunch of townsfolk that get trapped inside a grocery store when a mysterious mist rolls in. And there are some beings or creatures lurking around in the mist that seem to kill anybody that tries to wander outside. And so it's about this father and son and these people trying to survive in this grocery store, trying to see what they could possibly do next to try to escape and live a normal life again. And what I will say is the first like 30 to 50 pages of this book were a little slow, which when you have a novella that is this size could be a little bit problematic. But it was that build up, the character introductions, trying to get to that grocery store sequence was a bit tedious for me. But once we actually got to the grocery store and things really started to happen, the rest of the story was incredible. And the part about this book that disturbed me the most and was my favorite part about it was the physical descriptions of the monsters that were lurking in the mist. Some of them were so creepy and made my skin crawl. And it made me wonder if I was like actually in that situation in the grocery store and I saw what these people were seeing wandering around out there. I don't even know if I would want to try to survive. I would just be like, I'm just going to walk outside and just let one of these things eat me real quick because it was super disturbing. And as far as the ending of this book goes, it is one of the best, like most ominous, cliffhangery type endings that really just left a bad taste in my mouth. And I loved it. I thought the ending of this was so much fun. So that is The Mist by Stephen King. Definitely check it out if you're a King fan and you have not read it. Coming in at number three is Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. This is a book that I've wanted to read for such a long time, and I'm really stoked that I finally got into it. This is a deep sea horror novel, and what it does is it follows this scientific expedition of people that are going to the Mariana Trench to try to disprove or prove the existence of mermaids. Now, 7 years earlier, there was another expedition that was going out to film a mockumentary funded by this entertainment company, and they find the ship abandoned. Everybody is gone, and all they can find is this video footage of these people being slaughtered by these mermaids. And now, naturally, a lot of the general public thinks that this footage is a hoax. So now, 7 years later, there's this new expedition going out there to try to see if they can find these mermaids and prove that they're real. And I said in my review of this book, this isn't mermaids like Ariel from The Little Mermaid. These are like sharp teeth, fast, vicious mermaids that want to try to like kill and eat you. And what I'll say about this book is when it comes to that thalassophobia, that horror of the deep sea, not knowing what's beneath you, I thought it was done really, really well. There are some excellent scenes and sequences throughout here that just made my bones chill. And I am a person that is terrified of the ocean. That's why I especially like reading about deep sea horror because it really hits me in my like deepest of fears. And this book definitely did that. Also, some great character work in here. The author Mira Grant goes into like extreme levels of depth to flesh out all of her characters, sometimes a little bit to the book's detriment. There are some characters that I think could have probably gotten a pass, and maybe have cut down on this book by a good like 50 pages or so. But the main characters, the ones that really do deserve the development, are really well fleshed out, and I felt some great connection to the characters in here. I'll say the one other thing that kind of held it back for me was the ending. I was a little bit disappointed in it. It felt like as soon as this book was really reaching its climax, it just sort of ended. Um, so that's a mild criticism, but overall, I thought this was a really great, really entertaining read. I gave it like a 4.25 out of 5. This was a great time if you are a fan of those deep sea horror novels. All right, coming in at number two, we're almost there. This is Watchers. Oops, it's upside down. This is Watchers by Dean Koontz right there. This is the second Dean Koontz book I've ever read. The first one I listened to an audiobook version of earlier this year. I didn't like it at all, but I wanted to give him another shot because I know he's very popular. And this is what I was looking for. This is the Dean Koontz that I've heard about, that people love. This book was so much fun. If you're not familiar with the story, follows this guy, Travis. He is down on his luck. He's depressed. He finds this golden retriever out in the California wilderness and decides to bring the golden retriever home. It turns out that the golden retriever, who he names Einstein, is this super smart dog that was part of this scientific experiment to try to give human level intelligence to animals. And so Travis and his girlfriend Nora have to protect Einstein because there are these government agents trying to come after him to try to capture Einstein and put him back in a cage and experiment on him. There's also this other being called the Outsider that was part of this experiment, and it has also escaped from custody, and its sole mission is to hunt down Einstein, the golden retriever, and kill him. So Travis and Nora have to work together to save this dog, and along the way, they form just a beautiful friendship, a beautiful companionship between these two people and this dog that is just as smart as any other human, sometimes smarter than a lot of other humans. And that is the part of this book that I love the most, is that companionship. I think Travis and Nora are very well fleshed out, and seeing their relationship grow with this dog and the instinct that they feel to have to upend their lives to protect this animal was really touching, especially as someone who, I have a dog and I have two cats, and I would defend them with my life. I love them so much, and seeing that camaraderie in here was excellent. There's also, for the fans of like horror and gore and stuff like that. There are some great scenes in here, especially relating to the outsider creature. He kind of goes on a killing spree and murders some people on his path to try to get to Einstein. And there are some truly gruesome moments in this book that have to deal with that aspect of the story. But overall, I thought this was a great book. I definitely recommend it. If you have not read a Dean Koontz book, I think this is a great place to start because this is where I started and I absolutely loved it. So that is number two. Now, coming in at number one, by far my favorite book of the month is When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. This was an easy 5 out of 5 for me. I absolutely adored this book. It is the second Nat Cassidy book I've listened to. About 6 months ago, I read Mary by him and I thought it was excellent. So I wanted to check another one of his books out and I decided to pick up When the Wolf Comes Home on Libby and listen to it in audiobook form. This story just hits on all cylinders. So it follows this waitress. Her name is Jess, and she's a little down on her luck. She comes across this boy who is unnamed throughout the book. And they kind of form this bond. We learn that this boy is on the run from his father, who possesses the ability to turn into a wolf and is very abusive towards the little boy. And so Jess has to take this little boy with him and go on the run. It's actually kind of reminiscent of Firestarter by Stephen King. I read 2 books this month that involve a child and adult on the run from somebody. But I think this one just does it so much better. The bond that is formed between the boy and Jess is heartwarming and tragic. This boy coming from an abusive home and dealing with this deranged father figure has so much trauma. And Jess herself has a lot of trauma, specifically trauma related to her father. And so the two of them bond over that and just seeing how their relationship plays out. It turns out there's a little bit more to the boy than meets the eye, but I don't want to say anything because I think that is a part of the book that you should discover for yourself. But that aspect of the story leads to a lot of tension that is excellent. And then by far the most interesting and noteworthy thing about this book, in my opinion, is the way that Nat Cassidy writes like the violence and gore in this story. It is unbelievable some of the moments that happen. A lot of it has to do with this fatherly wolf type figure slaughtering people on the way to get to his son. And there were just so many moments throughout this book that were so visceral and disturbing that it literally made me shudder. I was like, "Ooh, it describes like eye like if you don't like eye violence, you're not going to like this book very much." But just so many disgusting moments, and as somebody that is a big fan of horror, moments like that are where I have a really really good time. If you're not into that, then you might not like this book at all because there are many graphic and extended scenes on violence. And overall just the plot of this book, the creativity that I can't go into because it will spoil a little bit too much. It really just shows how how great Nat Cassidy is at coming up with original ideas and implementing them into a story. Because I felt the same way about Mary as I do about this book, is just really creative ideas that were super interesting and super original. And I've just fallen in love with Nat Cassidy's writing, even just over the course of 2 books. I'm definitely going to check out more of his stories. And so When the Wolf Comes Home was my number one read of the month, coming in easy 5 out of 5 for me. All right, y'all. So that is my ranking of all 11 books that I read and listened to in the month of March 2026. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books, what you thought about them, how you would rank some of these books if you've read them. And stay tuned for more videos on the channel as I bring you more book related content. My name is Christian once again, and y'all have a great rest of your day. Peace.